Os ataques que o Brasil sofre quando se fala em Amazônia não são justos. Lá, mais de 90% daquela área está preservada. Está exatamente igual quando foi descoberto no ano de 1500. A Amazônia é fantástica.
É triste quando a gente vê madeira assim no chão, aquele madeira já morreu.
É um dever da FUNAI, é um direito nosso, é um dever da FUNAI. Direito nosso, é um dever. Eu nasci, na terra eu me criei, sou um índio.
Eu sou cacique, eu vou morrer em cima da minha terra, mas eu vou lutar pelo meu povo.
The comeback of Lula as president of Brazil has been regarded with great expectation, and he will reverse most of the damage that the previous administration with Jair Bolsonaro committed to the rainforest.
The new government hopes to reenact some of the same policies he had carried out in the 2000s, because between 2004 and 2008, Brazil was able to cut Amazon deforestation by almost 80%.
Located in South America, this is the Amazon rainforest. Spread across 5.5 million square kilometers, it's the largest remaining tropical rainforest in the world. Its basin is twice the size of India. The rainforest passes through Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, an overseas territory of France. Did you know this rainforest supports at least 10% of the world's known biodiversity and harbors around 40,000 plant species, 1,300 bird species, 2,200 types of fish, 427 types of mammals, and a staggering 2.5 million varieties of insects. Over 400 indigenous tribes call the Amazon rainforest their home. 20% of the Earth's oxygen supply is sourced from here. Its river, the Amazon, comprises nearly 16% of the world's total river discharge into the oceans. Nearly 2/3 of the Amazon rainforest is found in Brazil. Despite all this richness, over 10,000 species of plants and animals from the Amazon are at a high risk of extinction.
So the scenario for the rainforest is dire because the Amazon, according to many researchers, is no longer a carbon sink and actually emits carbon because of deforestation. Brazil, for instance, during the COVID crisis when factories were shut down, Brazil was an outlier in the world that it did not reduce emissions but actually increased them because deforestation levels went out of control. And I mean, researchers are assessing how close the Amazon is to that tipping point, after which we would not necessarily be able to recover the rainforest, but it would turn into a savanna-like biome.
On the 1st of January, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, popularly called Lula, assumed office as the 39th president of Brazil, after defeating his predecessor Jair Bolsonaro with a hairline margin of nearly 2%.
Viva a democracia! Viva o povo brasileiro!
Earlier, between 2003 and 2011, he had already served 2 consecutive terms as the country's president, enjoying a stellar run during that period. Owing to his sound economic policies, millions of Brazilians were pulled out of poverty, and the country experienced a fruitful, commodity-driven economic boom. But things changed for Lula in 2018 after he got arrested on charges of corruption. Lula was convicted following an investigation into a huge bribery scandal. However, in 2019, he was freed from prison after his convictions were overturned by the country's Supreme Court, allowing him to run again for office. Taking power for the 3rd time now, Lula vows to rebuild the country at present, in his own words, is in terrible ruins. This, however, is an understatement for describing the state his predecessor has left the Amazon rainforest in. Under Bolsonaro, deforestation of the Amazon increased by 60%. He also diluted environmental protections that made way for easier commercial exploitation of indigenous lands. In a bid to save the rainforest, Lula has now formed his dream team. Amazon activist Marina Silva has been chosen as the Environment and Climate Change Minister. Between 2003 and 2008, Silva served as an environment minister, where she oversaw the creation of dozens of conservation areas and fought against environmental crimes. Under her supervision, deforestation dropped dramatically, and now Lula hopes to bring some significant changes in the region.
Marina da Silva, he was tremendously successful in combating deforestation during her 5-year term in the previous mandate. They improved tremendously the monitoring capacity, which has been weakened right now. And one of the things that we will need to start by doing is that strengthening the Ministry of Environment, which has been tremendously weakened by Bolsonaro's administration.
Marina Silva already enacted a few measures to bring back harsh penalties, to recreate part of the bureaucracy that is responsible for enforcing environmental legislation.
The new president also appointed Sonia Guajajara, an indigenous woman, as the country's first minister of indigenous peoples. The announcement indicates that the new administration will prioritize cracking down on illegal deforestation, even if it means running afoul of powerful agribusiness interests.
The 4 years of the Bolsonaro government have meant a real tragedy and institutionalized genocide for us indigenous people. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is a genocide because Bolsonaro not only denies rights to territory, but he is also encouraging an increase in invasions and attacks against indigenous people.
Let's take you back 4 years from today. On the 1st of January 2019, when Jair Bolsonaro became the president of Brazil, he vowed to eliminate crime and corruption, which the South American country had been facing. But the far-right leader turned out to be a big disappointment. Be it loosened gun laws, protection of indigenous peoples and minorities, or even saving the Amazon, Bolsonaro failed on every ground. An astonishing 60% of the rainforest's total area falls within the Brazilian territory. It's a significant ecological fact that called for dedicated conservation efforts to preserve the very lungs of the planet. Adopting an opposing stance, Bolsonaro instead branded the forest as a golden ticket for accelerated economic expansion in the farming and mining industries. This also created a climate where the farmers felt emboldened to make illegal land seizes, while loggers and gold miners targeted protected areas to make bigger profits. What naturally followed was a slew of devastating environmental policies and missteps. In the 10-year period preceding 2019, the rate of deforestation in the Amazon had reduced markedly, but things started to change once Bolsonaro came to power. Take a look at these figures. From 2021 to July 2022, some 11,600 square kilometers were lost. It's an area roughly the size of Qatar. That is down 11% compared to the previous year, when over 13,000 square kilometers were destroyed. Even in the first 2 years of the former president's term, at least 10,000 square kilometers of forest area was lost each year. Totally, more than 45,000 square kilometers of the Amazon was wiped out under Bolsonaro's supervision.
Well, deforestation under Bolsonaro reached its highest levels in at least 15 years. During the Bolsonaro years, Brazil enacted dozens of regulations loosening environmental controls. Jair Bolsonaro opposed a practice that was common in Brazil, which is to destroy machinery used in deforestation. And that's a way of making environmental crimes very costly for perpetrators.
Rampant deforestation was accompanied by ravaging human-caused forest fires in the region, as after the felling of the trees, deforested areas would be set ablaze to carve out fresh pastures and farmland. Despite enough clear evidence, Bolsonaro surprisingly continued to deny recurring forest fire instances, and even charged the concerned stakeholders with the motive of defaming the country. That's not all. The annual budget for the Environment Ministry and its subordinate bodies was sizably slashed. As per some reports, the 2021 budget was the smallest in 2 decades. This serious shortage of funds stripped the environmental authorities of certain powers. Set up in 2008 to better finance the protection of the Amazonian rainforest and biodiversity, the Amazon Fund was a successful conservation effort, with nations like Norway and Germany making contributions to it. The fund was, however, frozen after Bolsonaro entered office in 2019 and weakened environmental protection measures in the Amazon, arguing that commercial farming and mining were required in the region to tackle poverty. At the time, he merely quipped, "Brazil doesn't need the money." Now, with Lula in power, the new president has signed a decree reinstating the governing board of the Amazon Fund, with broad representation from civil society and other stakeholders. Brazil's new president has revived the $1.2 billion Amazon Fund and has signed at least 7 executive orders to protect the world's largest rainforest. A move that was welcomed by climate activists and several countries who are doing their bit to protect the Amazon.
We already see an instant impact on the image of the Brazilian government in regards to the environment. For instance, Norway and Germany, which are the main sponsors of the Amazon Fund, they had pledged to resume donations once the committee was reinstated, and the president of Germany recently pledged 35 million euros to be cleared as an immediate token of cooperation.
This is the Javari Valley. It is one of the largest indigenous territories in Brazil. Extending across 85,000 square kilometers, it has a reputation for being a lawless zone. Its tropical bounty has made it a hotspot for illegal activities. On the 5th of June, Bruno Pereira, a Brazilian indigenous expert, was murdered along with British journalist Dom Phillips. Dom was researching for his book on sustainable development in the Amazon with his guide when they went missing in the area. Pereira had been introducing the British journalist to the indigenous people he could interview for a book about the Amazon. The local media reported that the duo were murdered for trying to protect indigenous people from drug traffickers and illegal miners, loggers, and hunters. The brutal murder triggered an intense international outcry. Bolsonaro came under heavy criticism for his allegedly slow response to their disappearance. Protesters also called for the resignation of FUNAI Agency's chief, Marcelo Xavier. FUNAI is the Brazilian government body that establishes and carries out policies relating to indigenous peoples. Federal prosecutors in Brazil had charged 3 men for the murders. Paulo Paulino Guajajara, the Brazilian indigenous activist, was killed in 2019 by illegal loggers during an ambush. Popularly known as Lobo or Wolf, Guajajara was part of the group of indigenous activists that aim to protect the 413,000 hectares of land in the Arariboia region against environmental crimes. His gruesome killing exposed the escalating battle between illegal loggers and indigenous tribes in the deep forests of the Amazon. This will be one of the biggest challenges Lula has to deal with for eliminating lawlessness in the Amazon. Native forest groups accused Bolsonaro of weaponizing the environment to carry out genocide and crimes against humanity. In 2021, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil approached the International Criminal Court to investigate Bolsonaro for genocide and ecocide. They charged him with persecuting native peoples and ravaging their homelands. The former president was also accused of a flawed COVID-19 response that had threatened the indigenous communities. Constitutionally, too, Bolsonaro's plans significantly undermined indigenous rights. Brazil's constitution carries a mandate for the government to demarcate or identify and set aside all indigenous territories. Since 1988, Bolsonaro was the first president to halt the demarcation process and not extend protection to any additional indigenous territories since his term began in 2019. Instead, he supported laws that would expose tribal lands to increased industrial development.
It's openly known that Jair Bolsonaro benefited the agri-livestock industry and made it easy for them to even commit some illegal or paralegal activities. He reversed many legislations in favor of this industry and weakened the rights of the minorities and the indigenous groups. This is something that will need to be reversed, and it's already mentioned by Lula da Silva that he's pointing into that direction. It's widely credited that indigenous groups and peoples are the best communities, the best position to combat illegal deforestation, illegal logging, mining activities, and in protecting these ecosystems that are highly valuable, not only in Brazil, but also globally. So in work in this direction will have to take place. So Lula da Silva has made some announcements in this regard.
Another key indigenous issue is illegal trespassing and mining on indigenous lands. Illegal extraction of gold in the Amazon jungle has skyrocketed since 2019, with indigenous zones bearing the brunt of this. During the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP27, held in Egypt, Lula said his administration would prosecute all crimes in the forest, from illegal logging to mining.
Jair Bolsonaro was a supporter of wildcat mining and actually he enacted legislation that would facilitate support for this kind of activity. And it's a type of activity that is way more deleterious to the environment than regular mining, because wildcat miners often use mercury. So it means that land, water, streams are contaminated. You see poisoning of fisheries, of people. And one of the first pieces of legislation, or one of the first acts of the Lula government in office, was to remove these provisions that had been passed by the Bolsonaro administration.
One thing Lula must remember is that this is 2023. The political environment has changed dramatically since the time he last served as president from 2003 to 2011. Bolsonaro may have fled to the United States just a day before Lula's oath-taking ceremony, but his supporters are still there.
It's hard to predict what is going to happen, because Lula has a big tent coalition that also includes agricultural producers. But one thing is certain is the place of indigenous peoples within the government is bigger than ever. For the first time, we're going to have an indigenous peoples ministry. We have two cabinet members who self-identify as indigenous, including one indigenous female indigenous leader who will be the indigenous peoples minister.
He also mentioned that his intention to host the COP30, the Climate Change Conference, in 2025. So indeed, there is a strong willingness by Lula da Silva, and it's possible or not, it's difficult because even the Congress is predominantly right-wing, and the trade-offs will not be easy for him.
Despite facing a hostile coalition, Lula has revived hope for the Amazon in a very big way. About 26% of the forest has already been lost or badly degraded. If timely action is not taken, the rest could transform into a savanna, pushing the Amazon rainforest to the point of no return.